The Israeli leader sought to make one thing clear. His government's military actions are rooted in international precedent, not unilateral defiance. To build that case, he turned the clock back nearly a quarter of a century to the days after the September 11th attacks on the United States. He said, there's a Security Council resolution. I think it's 1373. It was adopted about 2 weeks after September 11th. That resolution, passed unanimously at the United Nations, called on states not to harbour, fund or shelter terrorists. It compelled countries to prevent their soil from being used to launch attacks against others. It was at the time a watershed moment in international law, reaffirming that no state should be a safe haven for terror. The speaker continued by recalling Washington's immediate response after the Twin Towers fell. He said, on September 11th, the United States said, "We will hunt down these terrorists wherever they are." And 2 weeks later, the Security Council says that states must not harbour terrorists, give them shelter, finance them, or in any way allow them to work from their territory against other states. This was not only a reminder of history, but also the foundation of his argument. The world had accepted America's vow to strike terrorists wherever they hid, and soon after, that vow was put into practice. The United States invaded Afghanistan, targeting al-Qaeda operatives who had orchestrated the attacks. Years later, American forces struck deep inside Pakistan, killing Osama bin Laden in a nighttime raid. In both cases, sovereignty was crossed. In both cases, he argued, the world did not condemn America because it understood the stakes. He stated, based on that resolution and on the American policy, the United States bombed Afghanistan because that's where al-Qaeda was. And then they bombed Pakistan because that's where bin Laden was. And then, with sharp emphasis, he pointed out what did not happen. He said, now nobody said, my God, a terrible thing happened. America violated the sovereignty of Afghanistan, or America violated the sovereignty of Pakistan. Don't harbour terrorists. Nobody will have to act on your territory. The implication was clear. If America was justified in those moments, Israel too is justified today. Terrorism, he insisted, strips states of their shield of sovereignty. When governments allow terror to thrive within their borders or fail to root it out, they cannot then claim to be victims when others defend themselves. He underscored this principle firmly. He said, but it's our right, our internationally recognized right of states to act against terrorists who operate, who attack them from other states. This is what we did. The statement was a direct defense of Israel's ongoing operations. It framed those actions not as aggression, but as an extension of the same rules that the global community had already embraced. But if the legal precedent was one part of his message, the other part was emotional, sharpened into accusations of hypocrisy. In a voice heavy with frustration, he turned his focus toward critics abroad. He declared, and the hypocrisy of those who condemn Israel is just so obvious. They shouldn't condemn Israel, they should commend Israel for going against the Hamas terrorists, who not only endanger us, but endanger all of them. Here, the narrative shifted. Israel was not simply protecting its own citizens, it was confronting a network that threatens the wider world. The argument was designed to reposition Israel not as an isolated actor, but as a frontline defender of shared global security. The speaker then tied Hamas to a broader Islamist movement, the Muslim Brotherhood. He noted that many countries already recognized that organization as a destabilizing force. He explained, and most of them have already outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood, so I don't buy the hypocrisy, and I don't buy the condemnations. It was a rhetorical strike, reminding governments that they themselves had acted against related groups, yet some were still willing to single out Israel when it did the same. From there, the remarks pivoted back to the practical realities of military operations. Results, the speaker admitted, were still being gathered. It was too early for a full assessment. He said candidly, as far as the results, we're still checking it out. It's not yet fully conclusive. We're waiting to see it. The uncertainty, however, did not diminish his conviction. For even in the absence of final conclusions, there was one outcome he considered undeniable. He added, but one result I can say is obvious, and we considered it when I authorized this. The emphasis on authorization mattered. It reflected the weight of leadership, the personal responsibility that comes with signing off on a military strike. In those words, the speaker claimed ownership, sending a message of accountability not only to his citizens, but to the world. And with that, the formal argument ended. The voice softened, the tone shifted. To those around him, perhaps aides or military personnel, he offered a brief note of encouragement. He concluded simply, "Good job, good job." Broader analysis and framing for viewers. This was more than a defense of a single action. It was an attempt to situate Israel's military posture within the larger historical and legal framework of the global war on terror. By invoking the memory of September 11th, the UN resolution that followed, and America's military response, the speaker sought to remind the world of what it had already accepted, that terrorism nullifies safe haven, and that the right of self-defense extends across borders when lives are at stake. The speech also exposed a deep frustration, the perception that Israel is judged by a harsher standard than other nations. Words like hypocrisy and commend were not chosen lightly. They reflect a belief that while Western powers can act beyond borders with understanding, Israel is often met with immediate condemnation. And yet, beyond the defiance, there was also a moment of candor, an acknowledgement that operations are complex, that outcomes are not always immediately clear. That balance between certainty in principle and uncertainty in results gave the remarks a rare dual tone, defiant yet pragmatic. For Israel, the stakes are existential. For its critics, the questions are legal and moral. But as this speech revealed, the Israeli leadership sees the matter as already settled in international precedent. In their view, Resolution 1373, the American actions in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and the broader war on terror all point to one conclusion: that defending citizens against terrorism, even across borders, is not just a right, it is a duty. And so, when pressed about sovereignty, when confronted with condemnation, the response was unflinching. I don't buy the hypocrisy, and I don't buy the condemnations. The world may continue to debate, but from the podium, the message was firm. Israel will act, Israel will defend, and in doing so, Israel will stand not in isolation, but in the very tradition set by the global community in its own fight against terror.